Something's been haunting Mick Jagger for years, and now, he's finally breaking his silence. Beyond the fame, the music, and the wild stage presence, lies a reality far more raw than fans ever imagined. While the headlines focused on his heart surgery, what no one knew was that it wasn't his only battle. For decades, he's carried a private pain, medical struggles kept out of the spotlight, emotional wounds hidden behind the swagger. But in a rare, emotional moment, Jagger pulls back the curtain, and what he reveals will change the way you see him forever. His family begged him to stay silent, but Mick Jagger has had enough. At 81, he's no longer willing to protect the myths, the legacies, or the friendships. What he just revealed about Keith Richards could tear apart the bond that defined the Rolling Stones for over 6 decades. And when it comes to Charlie Watts' death, Mick says the truth is far darker than what the public was told. He's finally ready to expose the secrets they tried to bury, and it's sending shockwaves through the music world. Jagger's story began in Dartford, Kent, on July 26, 1943, born into a world at war. His father, Joe, a strict physical education teacher, kept discipline at the core of their home, his whistle hanging like a symbol of order on the bedroom door. That same bedroom became the scene of Mick's birth at 8:15 a.m., just as V-1 bombs screamed across the skies. The air raid sirens were wailing, drowning out any peace the moment might have offered. His mother, Eva, would later joke that her son came into the world not with a lullaby, but with a warning. That sound, the chaos, the urgency, the tension, never really left him. And now, it echoes once again, as Mick Jagger unleashes the truth no one was ready to hear. Mick Jagger's early life was shaped by a home that valued discipline, structure, and quiet ambition. His mother, Eva, a former hairdresser, was deeply involved in the local conservative association, while his father Joe ran the household like a military camp. Joe didn't just parent, he documented. Family notes show him timing baby Mick as he crawled across the rug in just over 6 seconds and proudly noting that his son could do a forward roll before his first birthday. This wasn't just parenting, it was training. Life was loving, yes, but it came with rules, expectations, and relentless measurement. In post-war Britain, luxury didn't exist. Food was rationed, and the Jaggers received just 8 ounces of sugar each week. So Eva got creative, feeding Mick mashed bananas as a substitute. Everything in their Dartford home ran like clockwork: church on Sundays, pressed shorts, and weekly elocution lessons. Even recreation had a purpose. In 1949, Joe arranged a basketball exhibition for American soldiers, a rare event in Britain and a sign that he saw the value in blending tradition with opportunity. The home was a reflection of the man at its center, tidy, exact, and quietly preparing Mick for a world far bigger than the small house on Dartford Road. That added to the surprise of Mick's wild stage life in subsequent years. Mick met Keith Richards, a child, at Wentworth Primary School in 1948. They had just turned 4. On the class list, their names were listed first. Keith had taken several red marbles from his grandfather's store and was sitting in Miss Gutzel's reception class. In return, Mick gave him a piece of American bubble gum. That was the beginning of their friendship. They performed together in the school nativity that Christmas. Keith played a toy drum as Mick sang Little Donkey. Their rhythm was even featured in a local newspaper. However, the boys lost contact after Mick's family relocated to Wilmington, 3 miles away, in 1954. Then, on October 17, 1961, they both appeared at Dartford Street, Mick carrying 2 rare American blues albums. When Keith saw him, he inquired about the records. After 7 years of not speaking, that encounter rekindled their passion. They were both huge fans of blues music. They missed 2 consecutive trains as they stood there chatting. Keith then stated that there was a 1 in 100 million possibility of such reunion. In 1954, only 21% of students passed the 11+ exam. Mick completed it with ease, earning 92 points for verbal reasoning and 87% for math. He became the head boy of Westgate House after enrolling at Dartford Grammar School. He led the cross-country team and received an A in Latin. His heart, however, was elsewhere. R&B and American blues were his obsessions. In order to obtain imported recordings before they arrived at stores, he exchanged food with U.S. airmen. He brought a Muddy Waters album to class one day in 1956 and gave his classmates an explanation of the beat. By 1959, he was slipping in blues album reviews while editing the school magazine. He once passed off a review of a Bo Diddley album as a spiritual music essay. It was not funny to the headmaster. He repeatedly removed the school's record player. However, Mick would subsequently use all of that in-depth research and analysis to help him negotiate contracts and record deals with extreme precision. Mick started his first band when he was 17. It took place at 7:45 p.m. on March 12, 1960. In the living room of Dick Taylor. Mick brought a notebook called Repertoire Chicago Style, which was full of songs, and a harmonica. Dick, Heath, Mick, and Bob Beckwith on a homemade bass comprised their tiny ensemble. They were joined by 8 buddies to play. The British Library still has the cassette recording of the rehearsal. They received 3 guineas for their performance at the Ealing Coronation Club a few weeks later. Mick stored the cash in a chess fund jar. Even though none of them had committed girlfriends yet, they were already playing songs like, I Just Want to Make Love to You. They were described as boisterous kids attempting to imitate black music in the local media. Critics would label them Britain's most deadly live band just 4 years later. In 1960, Mick got admitted to the London School of Economics. He was destined to pursue a degree in finance and accounting. He resided at Connaught Hall and his fees were $50 each term. James Mead, who would go on to win a Nobel Prize, gave a lecture to him on his first day. Mick, however, was sketching guitars in his notepad. He missed 28 out of 45 classes in a span of 12 weeks. Rather, he frequented venues such as the Marquee and Ealing Jazz. Even his copy of The Economist was in his briefcase, along with a microphone. The echo made him practice singing in public restrooms. At one point, he wrote to his instructor to request permission to skip exams because his band had 6 gigs scheduled. His request was turned down by the university. Even though he left by the summer of 1962, the time he spent studying economics wasn't wasted. Years later, he shocked even the most seasoned promoters by using that expertise to close lucrative transactions. On October 17, 1961, that historic morning at Dartford Station took place. When Keith saw Mick, he had 2 American blues records and was 18. Keith was carrying his guitar. Since elementary school, they hadn't seen one another. They stood there discussing records, stores, and music. Mick might have missed that train if he had slept a few more minutes. And perhaps there would have been no Rolling Stones. Mick had 150 imported records at the moment. Keith was already able to perform intricate guitar licks. They agreed to get together once more that weekend. Their lives and the history of music were altered by that encounter. Mick and Keith attended Alexis Corner's band performance at the Ealing Club on April 7, 1962. However, it was a blonde guitarist going by the name Elmo Lewis who truly took their breath away. Brian Jones was his true name. He played slide guitar like no one else they had ever heard, and he wore a striped jacket. Keith claimed to have heard authentic Delta blues live for the first time. Brian could even recall record catalog numbers from memory, and Mick wrote in his notebook, plays like James. They talked to him at the train station after the show. According to Brian, he was sleeping on floors and was homeless. He was busking to make ends meet after leaving Kellenham. Keith and Mick were impressed. They knew they had discovered someone special that evening. By May 1962, Mick was still juggling late-night gigs and economics classes. His days frequently ended after midnight, having begun before sunrise. He received 3 guineas per performance when performing with Blues Incorporated. He couldn't earn that much working at Tesco. At school, however, things weren't going well, but one night during a BBC broadcast, a producer heard his voice and wrote, "Find this boy a contract." His instructors became aware of his declining grades. He was dubbed London's Howland Wolf by the New Musical Express. To avoid his parents smelling the cigarette smoke on his clothes, he still had to enter their home covertly. Officially, the Rolling Stones were founded on July 12, 1962. They performed at the Marquee Club for the first time at that time. They received $20. Ian Stewart, Dick Taylor, Brian, Mick, Keith, and a borrowed drummer were all in the lineup. The stage door would not open, so they had to move their equipment down the fire escape. Songs like "Kansas City" and "Got Love If You Want It" were part of their repertoire. They were described by Mick as a group of little stones traveling the nation. The club actually lost money, and there were only 48 individuals in the crowd. Now, however, that night is legendary. Since then, tours alone have brought in almost $2 billion for the Stones. On July 27, 1962, the end-of-term results were announced, and Mick had passed all 5 of his initial courses. Out of 31 pupils, he came in 7th place. That was sufficient to get him a $100 per year job at Shell Oil in the future. However, he submitted a brief letter on August 3 announcing his departure for music. For 3 weeks, he didn't hear from his $720 a year father. His mom broke down in tears. Jobs were hard to come by and the economy was poor. Mick, however, had calculated. After expenses, he may earn $13 if the band performed 4 times a week. That was nearly double the daily wage of an entry-level economist. However, nothing was assured. Their van was repossessed after Brian failed to make a payment. Amps had to be transported on the tube. Mick claimed he could have produced a thesis on the gold standard crisis in an interview from 1995. The Rolling Stones hurried into a tiny London studio in June 1964 to record a song they hardly knew. As they recorded, Keith Richards was still learning how to play the guitar. They were encouraged to try a soul single by Irma Thomas when their manager saw it in a store in Los Angeles. "Time Is on My Side" was released in the United States on September 25, a few months later. It rose to number 6 on the Billboard charts in a few weeks. The Stones were suddenly viewed differently by radio stations that had previously considered them like noisy outsiders. In a single day, a New York station received 4,500 phone inquiries. They ended up on American Bandstand as a result of that surge of attention. The band's rough sound and Mick Jagger's free, drawling vocals offered American teenagers something fresh and unadulterated. Compared to the Beatles, it wasn't slick. It was emotional and difficult. Before they had even gone on tour, the track also helped their US album 12 by 5 become a gold standard. Blues covers were suddenly more than simply underground. They were material for charts. After several months, a shift occurred. The band was recording late into the night in Hollywood in January 1965. It was their own tune this time. It wasn't a cover the last time. Only Richards and Jagger were given credit. After being released in February, it reached the top of the UK charts in March and remained there for 3 weeks. For British fans, it was the first time they wanted the Stones' own voice instead of noises they had borrowed. At 3 a.m, the flip side, "Play with Fire," was recorded. Phil Spector is playing bass in Los Angeles. The band had established their edge, as evidenced by the 2 tracks. Within 2 weeks, Decca Records produced 250,000 copies, but by lunchtime, stores were still out. Critics took note. Once disregarded, even American DJs began to take notice. Fans in Belfast chanted the chorus for 2 minutes before the band even started their March tour. The headline in the newspapers had changed. "Beware, Beatles. The Stones are able to write." Keith Richards awoke at 3 a.m, just 2 months later. At a motel room in Florida. He grabbed his cassette recorder and played a hazy guitar line for 30 seconds while half asleep. He then went back to sleep. The hook for one of the most popular songs in rock history was derived from that crude concept. Jagger composed lyrics while traveling on a highway 3 days later. They recorded Satisfaction in Hollywood on May 12, 1965. To achieve the ideal distorted guitar tone, Keith insisted on using a brand new fuzzbox. On June 5, the single was made available in the United States. By July 10, it had risen to the top. It sold 500,000 copies every week while it was there for 4 weeks. It was prohibited from daytime radio in the UK due to its overly suggestive content. Nevertheless, it rocketed to the top of the charts when it was released on August 20. It was described as a threat to parents worldwide by Time magazine. At soundcheck, more than 180 teenagers in Paris were cited for rioting simply because they heard the riff. Later, the Library of Congress declared it a turning point and added it to its national registry. It wasn't merely a success. It was an explosion of culture. It was more than simply the music, though. Mick Jagger frightened civilized society. Wearing tight checkered pants, he took the stage in London in March 1964. The media was unsure on how to interpret him. A few months later, CBS received 800 complaint letters in 2 days while making an appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. His hip movements and the way he licked his lips infuriated the audience. They would never be invited back, according to Sullivan. Ratings then arrived. The season's highest-rated portion was this one. Naturally, they received another invitation. Venues began putting up posters prohibiting dancing in the aisles during their second U.S. tour. 3 girls were arrested by police for stripping off while attempting to approach Jagger at a Sacramento gig. Jagger's movements caused a lustful frenzy, one officer noted. The tabloids in Britain went crazy. Some wanted the band to be prohibited from returning to the United States. It didn't slow them down. In just 42 minutes, 84,000 tickets were sold during their 1965 UK tour. A record that endured for many years. Their debut album was released in April 1964, just a year earlier. The recording cost was just over £1,000. There was no name on the cover. The manager wished for people to become familiar with their faces. Decca anticipated a small sales volume. Rather, it caused the Beatles to lose their 21-week reign at the top of the charts. The record sold 200,000 copies by the middle of May. The majority of the songs were covers. Jagger and Richards only wrote one, but it made no difference. The sound was described by critics as energetic and gritty. The label pleaded with the producer to lower the volume of Jagger's vocals because they were mixed so loudly. He declined. Even with a different title, the album peaked at number 11 when it was published in the United States. One publication referred to them as the most dangerous thing in music since the Twist, despite the fact that they had little radio play. They were obviously more than simply another band. They were something else. They went through their most creative phase from 1968 to 1972. Beggar's Banquet, published in December 1968, was the first in the series, while Exile on Main Saint, released in May 1972, was the last. They produced the 4 albums that would define their reputation in less than 4.5 years. Producer Jimmy Miller designed each one, and they were all recorded in studios on 3 continents. Jagger became a father and the band members altered over time. Beggar's Banquet revived their blues heritage. Gimme Shelter opened Let It Bleed, and a gospel choir closed it out. Although Brown Sugar had been recorded 2 years prior to fulfill an old contract, Sticky Fingers unveiled their new label and logo. Exile on Main Saint was mixed in various cities months apart and recorded in a wet French basement. It dominated charts on both sides of the Atlantic despite its clumsy creation. Critics would rank it as one of the best albums ever years later. During those 4 years, the Stones effortlessly combined hard rock, R&B, gospel, country, and blues. Mick Jagger's entered a role in a movie in 1970 that threw doubt on reality. In the film performance, he portrayed a rock star who had burned out. Although filmed in 1968, it wasn't released until September 1970. There was a lot of sex, drug use, and identity switching in the movie. Dozens of modifications were required by censors. It was dubbed depraved by Time magazine. Richards co-wrote the song Memory from Turner, but he wasn't present when it was recorded. Despite not recouping its costs, the movie eventually became a cult favorite. It was restored in 4K in 2023. People's perceptions of rock artists on screen were said to have changed as a result of Jagger's wild appearance. The performance was filmed that same year. Money started to become an issue. The tax debt for each band member was approximately £200,000. The harsh tax regulations in Britain might take up to 98% of an individual's income. They were broke because their boss handled the books improperly. Jagger relocated to Paris in spite of their notoriety. A villa in the south of France was rented by Richards. They dragged cables through windows and avoided local drug dealers because it lacked a professional studio. Due to the expiration of their work licenses, they spent the entire night recording and then mixed the tracks in Los Angeles. The flight from British taxation and the anarchy that resulted in exile on Main St. started a trend. They were followed by Rod Stewart and David Bowie. "You made £100, they took 90, so we left," Jagger famously remarked. A storm inspired one of their most potent tracks to date. While observing the umbrellas being tossed by the wind in London, Keith Richards composed the riff for Gimme Shelter. However, Jagger gave it a deeper tone. The violence on TV was replicated in the lyrics. Vietnam, murders, and instability. The timing of its December 1969 release was harsh. Just now, the My Lai massacre had come to light. A concert ended tragically a few days later. Mary Clayton recorded her now famous background vocals in the midst of the song. Wearing curlers and pregnant. Her voice trembled as she screamed, "Rape, murder, it's just a shot away." The studio came to a halt. It was never a single, but it was haunting. The tune was included in war documentaries' soundtracks. Oliver Stone, the filmmaker, even used it to introduce his film JFK. By 1989, they had evolved from a band to a brand. A promoter handed them $70 million up front when they got back together for the Steel Wheels tour. Millions more were added by sponsorships. Approximately its initial year, the tour brought approximately $90 million. Among 1989 and 2002, they delivered in around $1.5 billion from concert events, merch, and licensing. They outsold YouTube, Springsteen, and even Michael Jackson. Even when they weren't recording new song, they made hundreds of thousands from old albums. Their excursion from 2005 to 2007 made over $500 million. By means of then, their indicates have been run like essential sports activities teams with branding conferences and pricing techniques. They proved that a rock band could remaining. No longer simply as artists, however, as a worldwide enterprise. However, now not every display changed into a fulfillment. On 6th of December 1969, they deliberate a free live performance in California. It turned into Imagine to be the West Coast solution to Woodstock. The whole thing went wrong. The vicinity modified on the ultimate minute. They ended up at a bleak speedway and not using a fences, clinical tents, or proper degree. They anticipated 80,000 humans. Nearly 300,000 showed up. Traffic blocked ambulances, Crimson moved volunteers, stitched wounds underneath kerosene lanterns. One singer got knocked out earlier than noon. The thankful useless refused to play. What became intended to be a peaceful display was a nightmare. Protection were promised to a biker gang in trade for $500 really worth of beer. They parked their motorcycles in the front of the level and started out swinging chains and pool cues. Extra than 60 assaults were stated in only some hours. At 5:14 p.m., a younger man in a vibrant green suit pulled a gun. A biker stabbed him to loss of life even as the Stones performed Below My Thumb. Cameras captured the whole thing. It wasn't the handiest tragedy. 3 others died that day. One was hit by using an automobile. Every other drowned. A third died of an overdose. 4 humans died, 850 have been injured, and 3 babies have been born on the speedway floor. One coroner said it appeared like a struggle quarter. Mick Jagger became punched inside the face when he arrived, but hours later, he walked on level and attempted to calm every person down. Some band individuals desired to forestall the show. Bassist Bill Wyman later stated he became ashamed they kept playing. Keith Richards stated preventing ought to have made matters worse. Decades later, the debate nevertheless lingers. One issue's for certain, that day changed the way people saw rock concerts for all time. In January 1967, the Information of the Sector accused Jagger of taking Benzedrine in public, confusing him with Brian Jones. Jagger sued for legal, stressful $50,000. The tabloid retaliated by means of alerting police that Jagger would be the use of capsules at Redlands. 10 days later, the raid happened. The case was vulnerable, however the damage was carried out. Advertisers pulled returned, the BBC banned their song, and the lawsuit was dropped. Years later, the paper collapsed at some stage in a telephone hacking scandal. Jagger had once said it might choke on its own lies. He ended up dead in 2003. The newspaper failed to continue to exist. Jagger and Marianne Trustworthy were inseparable in view that 1966. She turned into 19. He became 22. They lived collectively in a flat blanketed in black velvet. However, at the back of the glamour, matters fell apart. After the Redlands bust, her name became splashed throughout almost 150 headlines. In 1968, she had become pregnant. 3 months later, she misplaced the baby. She blamed the drugs and alcohol that had turned out to be part of her day-by-day existence. Depression set in. Jagger cheated. She struck lower back with the aid of dozing with Keith Richards, a moment he later described as unforgettable. By way of 1970, she became homeless. He turned into riding wild horses. She believed the track commenced as her suicide word. They ended things the equal week Brian Jones died. Jagger's non-public lifestyles became public obsession. One biography claimed he had slept with round 4,000 people between 1962 and 2001. It really is one new accomplice each 3 days. The listing consists of Angelina Jolie, Farrah Fawcett, and even allegedly David Bowie. Keith Richards said Mick even seduced a therapist supposed to cure him. Jagger joked he desired every body with a pulse and rhythm. By using the 1970s, his accountants set up a fund called the Babylon Department to deal with paternity claims. He had as a minimum 6 court cases in that decade on my own. Jerry Corridor as soon as said he known as every female darling to avoid remembering their names. Whilst requested if 4000 changed into exaggerated, Jagger smiled and stated he never counted 2 times in one night. He married Bianca in May 1971, just 4 months after meeting her. She turned into already pregnant. The marriage became chaos. The mayor became overdue for lunch. Site visitors stretched to the airport and Mick misplaced the hoop. She wore only a white blazer. He wore inexperienced silk. Their daughter Jade became born that October. However, Jagger failed to sluggish down. He was nonetheless seeing Jerry Corridor and paying support for his first child. Born in 1970 to singer Marcia Hunt, he had denied paternity until a blood test in 1979 compelled him to admit it. Bianca filed for divorce in 1978. She claimed adultery. The fee was $1 million. Nonetheless, she went to his album release weeks later and danced with Jack Nicholson below a banner that examine omit you. Jerry Hall met Jagger in 1977 and gave him a preference. End capsules or end her. He ended pills but replaced them with sex. Their dating lasted over many years. They had 4 youngsters, however the dishonest by no means stopped. Keith Richards once guessed Jagger's number was round 4000. That made Hall ask for help. She went public and known as him an intercourse addict. That taken aback every person. This wasn't rock star conduct anymore. It turned into something deeper, something scientific. Inside the past due 1980s, Hall pushed Jagger to try intercourse therapy. He went, but it failed to work. He seduced the therapist. Richards referred to as it the maximum costly quickie in rock history. Paul saw it as confirmation that he couldn't be cured. The band still jokes about it. On a few boards, it is even indexed below case studies approximately sex dependency. Jagger's tangled history with Anita Pallenberg nearly broke the band. In 1968, they have been filming the movie performance. Matters got actual off-screen, too. Pallenberg had been with Richards. Before that, Richards had slept with Trustworthy whilst she was with Jagger. The band changed into caught in a cycle of revenge. Pallenberg later admitted she slept with Jagger once. Richards in no way got over it. He refused to permit her seem in greater films. He called Jagger Brenda. The feud almost ruined recording periods for 2 albums. Crew contributors believed sex changed into a weapon within the band. Jagger has 8 official kids with 5 ladies, however that's just the respectable depend. In 1969, Marcia Hunt got pregnant. Jagger sent her $200 after which disappeared. 9 years later, a court docket made him take a paternity take a look at. There are nonetheless rumors of other youngsters from the 1970s. In 1998, Brazilian model Luciana Jimenez became pregnant. Paul left him quickly after. Hunt later auctioned her letters from Jagger for $1802 to $250. She described how he could vanish the moment everybody sighted a child. Even now at 80, rumors swirl about more kids in South America and Europe. Richards had his personal ways of lashing out. Inside the 1980s, he gave Jagger several nicknames. Brenda, Her Majesty, Tiny Todger. They hated every other in the course of the mixing of Undercover in 1983. Engineers could mock Jagger whilst he wasn't inside the room till they found out he was status proper behind the glass. Jagger were given even by refusing to file guitar parts. Richards needed to do it all himself. The studio payments piled up. That year alone, they used 400 studio hours and slightly spoke to every other. Richards even wrote a tune with a line that mocked Jagger's degree character. While Richards became scuffling with heroin inside the past due 70s, Jagger took manage. He rewrote tour plans, changed track keys, and micromanaged every element. By the time Richards got smooth, Jagger had locked in complete strength. Even if drug tests came returned smooth, Jagger stored manipulate. Richards stated he felt like an worker in his personal band. The album Undercover Simplest sold 1 million inside the US, down from 4 million on the previous report, however not anything changed. In the mid-1980s, the band nearly broke up. Jagger signed a solo deal. He instructed journalists he did not care if the Stones folded. They didn't excursion. They slightly met. Internally, human beings referred to as a global conflict too. Richards responded by means of spending $1.5 million on a solo album just to prove he didn't need Jagger. By way of 1986, executives had written them off. One article asked if the Stones had been executed for appropriate. It was the primary time absolutely everyone had taken that idea seriously. Jagger's solo albums failed to assist his case. His debut reached wide variety 13 in the US. His next album did not even crack the top 40. One critic stated even Sheila E. outsold him that year. His video for Permits paintings value $500,000 greenbacks and slightly made a dent on the charts. Richards' solo paintings made with half the price range offered better. By using 2003, Jagger's solo albums have been being listed the various most disappointing of all time. Then came the truce. In 1988, they met at a resort in Barbados. Charlie Watts helped carry them collectively. They agreed to one greater album, one greater tour. That choice saved them. The album Metallic Wheels got here out in 1989 and sold 2 million copies in 10 weeks. The tour made $175 million. Their music Mixed Emotions reached Variety 5. They have been returned and that they have been larger than ever. Jagger used that moment to signal a $45 million deal. It was the begin of a new technology, but the years stored coming. In March 2019, Jagger wished coronary heart surgical procedure. The band postponed everything. His operation became sensitive. Medical doctors used a catheter to update a valve. The threat turned into real. Each cancelled display became well worth round $12 million. But within 10 days, Jagger became back to stretching and dancing. In May additionally, he posted a video dancing to the Wombats. Docs were amazed. With the aid of June, he changed into again on level in Chicago, walking over 12 kilometers during the show. His case is now studied in medical journals. Then got here the toughest loss. In 2021, Charlie Watts died. Co-guidelines stored the band from announcing goodbye. Jagger changed into crushed. At the subsequent show, he struggled to talk. The band saved going, however it wasn't the same. Simplest Jagger and Richards remained from the original lineup. Nonetheless, Jagger became grief into movement. Watts' last recordings appear on 2 songs in their subsequent album. In 2024, Jagger kicked off another excursion. At 80, he turned into sprinting across stadiums, performing for almost 2 hours every night. He trained like an athlete. Gym workouts, yoga, 8-mile runs. His frame fat became around 13%. He additionally raised his young son, accumulated vinyl, and performed blues golf equipment in mystery. While requested about retirement, he laughed and known as it every other phrase for boredom. In 2025, it all paid off. The Rolling Stones gained a Grammy for Best Rock Album. Jagger changed into 81. It were 29 years due to the fact their remaining win. The album featured Paul McCartney, Elton John, Girl Gaga, or even the late Charlie Watts. It hit primary in 23 nations. The excursion earned $250 million. Their total concert revenue exceeded $2 billion.